Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to yet another episode of Full Metal Tuxedo Podcast. I am your host, of course, Gregory. And tonight's episode is probably going to be one of the most off the wall that I've done. And there's a couple reasons for that. My head has been in history mode lately. I've taken a bit of a hiatus from doing my regular content. Of course, I spent a little over a year doing almost nothing but Tell Me More on the Armoured Skeptic channel. And I've been, I enjoyed that experience, but I am absolutely itching to get back to the tinfoil helmet, The History is a Lie series. And that's kind of just been my focus for the last week or two. However long it's been. I don't know, time just flies. Yet it also seems like it takes forever. There's no real easy way to sort of ease into, revealing what exactly the Giza Plateau is. And I'm not going to actually literally reveal the actual title of the location, the actual significance in this video. It all is going to lead up in the Tinfoil Helmet series. But the main reason I'm sort of making this episode tonight is to give you extra material to understand the context of what I am going to reveal in that episode. Because when it comes to the Giza Plateau, it is arguably the single most complex historical location on the entire planet. It is, technically the center of the physical landmass of the Earth. And everybody knows that the pyramid has so many mathematical perfect equations, mapped into its geometry. Also, the fact that it's so impossible to explain how the Egyptians could have built it with our current understanding of the technology that they had access to at the time. I'm not going to do the broken record thing and, go over all that again. But literally everything ties back to Giza. Everything. When it comes to religion, philosophy, humanity, so much of all of our cultures across the entire planet can tie back to that. And there's a few reasons for that. Possibly one, because there was a time in our own history when it became a muster location for people to survive in northern Africa when the rainforest disappeared, which, interestingly enough, you may have been taught in school happened over thousands of years, but they now recognize that northern Africa turned into a desert, in historical terms, in long history terms, and you guys know that I love long history. Like, metaphorically, it happened overnight. People did a bum's rush to the lusher locations, which ended up just basically being along the Nile. And, they also say that humanity, sapiens, as it were, originated at the basin of the Nile, So a lot of our history, who we are as a global people, ties back to that region. The religion, I really cannot wait to do the religious stuff. I've been sort of hesitant to get into it. I've been becoming more and more comfortable the more I do this podcast, because it is a bit of a one-way conversation. I'm not getting really direct feedback from you guys, other than your brave words in the chat challenging my masterful ideas. I've also, I've just been coming more and more comfortable just letting it all out, because my brain has been just filled with this information forever. I know it's kind of hard to gauge you guys exactly how you feel about talking about religious things. Every once in a while I get a little bit of resistance, because I know that I've garnered a fairly large atheist audience over the years. some of my best friends are atheists, you know? So I actually really love atheists. Obviously, I used that title for the longest time even. But when it comes to understanding who we are, you don't have to see religion as historically accurate, but until you actually learn to appreciate, you know, religions and their stories for their history, then you'll never really understand the mindset of humanity. Because I was, you know, raised Christian, my understanding is through the lens mostly of the Abrahamic understanding of these sorts of phenomenon and you know, spiritual, supernatural, historical stuff. But when I do that, I'm not advocating the Bible or saying that it's accurate or it's historically correct, but there is history in it. I talk about the Coneheads a lot. The Coneheads and the Giants, I often suggest, are the Nephilim in the Bible. And there's lots of different terms for lots of different kinds of people, classes of people that are used often in the Bible. And it gets to the point where you just sort of have to accept that they had to have been referring to something real, whether they were representing it correctly or not. You know what? I might even just sort of reveal it in this podcast tonight. Because it's not like, well, who are you guys going to tell? You don't know anybody. No. Because, I mean, arguably more people are going to hear this in the main episode anyways. Because, you know what? Tying this all together for you tonight will actually be a great joy for me. So just remember, yeah, I'm going to use a lot of biblical terms, but I've talked about some of these things before in the tinfoil helmet. The tinfoil helmet, I should really explain sort of the purpose of that show. I preface every episode by saying it's just for fun, don't take it seriously. I'm sort of doing what Richard Hammond did in Jurassic Park. You know, he's making these genetic anomalies that sort of resemble dinosaurs, and he's calling them dinosaurs. But he's basically explaining that what he's done is he's flubbed a bunch of frog DNA to sort of make creatures that resemble what a dinosaur should look like. And I kind of do that with my stories. So I can piece a lot of things together. You know, like, I don't know what term to use, because I know that like a lot of the stuff I talk about is technically under the realm of esoteric information. I don't study under anything or whatever. I am interested in the kinds of things that like Freemasons talk about, but I've never spoken to a Freemason or dipped into the kinds of resources that they have or anything like that. I like to avoid the word occult because people don't really know what that means, because it has the word cult in it. It sounds like a bad word, and people often use it in a negative connotation, but that word literally just means hidden, and for the most part it means essentially the same thing as esoteric. Hidden, unknown. No, the whole idea of the esoteric ties back to Egypt, literally. The whole esoteric occult practice is the one time I'll use it. Ties back to this concept of the mystery schools, which starts back to Egypt. And a lot of people say it was Akhenaten who started it. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. But there's a million reasons why groups like the Masons and a lot of those esoteric, fun-loving groups venerate the pyramids so much and Egypt so much, is because they too know everything ties back to it. You know, everything's about 33. I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, but the opening song, Mother of the Void, is exactly 3 minutes and 30 seconds long. I actually noticed that a lot of my favorite songs on my Spotify playlist are 3 minutes and 33 seconds. You'll notice that, you know, artists and, you know, public figures will use that number a lot. The 33 marks essentially where the pyramids are, more or less. Oh, okay, I should mention too, before I actually get into the meat of this, is that even religion ties back to it. So the Abrahamic faith you know, the one that I'm the most familiar with. When the Exodus did happen, there is historical reason to believe that there was this Exodus, just that the timeline of when it actually happened is a little bit flubbed as well. But there is a historical parallel to that story. And okay, the Hebrews took with them technology and knowledge. I've alluded to them taking the Ark of the Covenant before, which, you know, I'm going to do a follow-up. Or they didn't, the Ark of the Covenant was like a copy of what was inside of the Great Pyramid. And it's like a type of technology. And it's sort of very, very, very similar to the Tesla technology I described in my Tesla video. Yeah, it'll be good to do a follow-up on that, because the whole like temple setup with the Ark of the Covenant is supposed to be in this very dark room, the Holy of Holies. Well, the reason it's in such a dark room is, you know, that's the seat of God, but you can't see God unless it's in a very dark room. Well, what that tells me is that between those angels' wings on the top of the ark, that there was probably a soft glow of an electrical arc, a little bit of plasma. Yeah, I look forward to revealing, you know, the meaning of that, how that worked. And the Hebrews also took with them religion. Now, that's going to be very offensive for a lot of people to hear, because you probably think Egypt and the ancient Egyptian religion is pagan in comparison if you're really dug into those religious belief systems. But unfortunately, it's true that the vast majority of the concepts that we see in the Abrahamic faith do tie back to the ancient Egyptian religion. And again, that sort of ties into the whole God being electricity on a metal throne thing. God, I can't wait to fucking tell you guys about that. I'm actually, of all the things that I've sort of figured out, like some of it is stuff that I've pieced together from other people's work. You know, I think that that's sort of just the way my memory works. And what makes me sort of perfect for a show like this is that I can just listen to a million opinions, and the stuff I like, I just absorb it like a sponge, and then I can, you know, smoke a little bit of weed and ramble about it for an hour and a half on a podcast every other Saturday. Okay, you're going to hear a million people cling on to the fact, and I'm dug in on this. It is a fact that the stone, the original stone of the Sphinx and the quarry, date back to a minimum of 12,000 years, which means that it was probably even older. And, you know, that ties into the great disastrous global flood event that I argued happened around that time, which is, you know, still very likely, and I still think, you know, perfectly ties into this sort of like changeover period that happened around then. The Bible would say that that was around 5,000 years ago, but again, the timeline of the Bible is just absolutely screwed. It's wrong. But I do appreciate that they have recorded a lot of these events. And, you know, there's parallel stories in Sumeria and, you know, cultures around the world, so we know that something definitely happened then. Anyways, I'm not going to, again, beat a dead horse on that. Broken record. But, okay, a lot of people will reason from that because we really can't explain with our current understanding, you know, the paradigm that we exist under in archaeology, how the ancient Egyptians could have built the pyramids. A lot of people will conflate that ancient rock underneath the Sphinx with the entire site. And there is a good argument for that. And it's actually important because you can't forget this. If you line up all the stars in Orion's belt and adjacent to it with the ground to exactly when the Leo, would appear on the horizon. I want to say it's the summer solstice, but I want to say that's when it is. The Leo lines up perfectly with the Sphinx, and the pyramids line up with Orion's belt perfectly at that time, at around 11,500 years ago or so. I think that that time period is significant, and I think that it's absolutely correct to look at that site as like a time capsule for that. It's explaining a very, very important period of time in our history. One that every culture and, you know what, every goddamn movie studio venerates to this day, over and over and over and over again. Even the hero's journey, you know, the kinds of stuff that's described in the book of Revelation, all, you know, apocalyptic events, stuff like that. All those fables and tales originally tie back to what happened at that time. All the cultures obviously took a very great interest in the world basically being destroyed and decided to remember it forever. And one way or another, it's like the story just keeps being told and we keep having to remember it. But, you know, that's for good reason. However, just because some of the Sphinx is 12,000 years old, and you can argue that the plateau is laid out to that time period, that does not mean that the pyramids are that old. Now, I hate to burst everybody's bubble that thought that they were. I'm sorry, they're not. Now, very little carbon was found in them, but there was a small amount of wood found in the Great Pyramid, and we know for sure that the Great Pyramid was sealed for thousands of years, and it was only for a few hundred years people have been making their way in there, looting it and whatnot. But this small amount of wood in there is definitely much older than the people that would have started excavating it and looting it. So we know that it wasn't introduced during that time. The wood dates back to right around the time that they say that the pyramids were actually built. And at worst, or at best, depending on, you know, your point of view, they're 1,000 years older. Only 1,000, which, you know, in long time terms doesn't explain the 12,000 year thing. But when you look at the layout, you know, the layout definitely suggests an understanding of that time period. So one question you can ask, you know, I like letting you guys think about these things before I just tell you what I think or what I know. One way you can sort of look at that is that this mystery school that Akhenaten had started, and they do say that the pyramids were built right after, right? You know, like only how many pharaohs later? It was very shortly after Akhenaten. They moved back to Giza, built pyramid after pyramid, 3, then 3, then 3 pyramids. And they got progressively worse in construction style and smaller over time. So I think that whoever it was that built it definitely tapped into that old technology, that Atlantean stuff I always talk about, the pre-flood stuff. But obviously, you know, they themselves, the Atlanteans themselves, did not build the pyramids. Honestly, the limestone, most of it is limestone. It wouldn't have lasted that long. You know, it would be in a state of just absolute erosion. The pyramids would be mostly sand. If they were just limestone from 12,000 years ago. But yes, like I said, we know that there was something going on there technologically. Before the pyramids were built, in the oldest graves that they found in Egypt, the oldest ones, they found those jars, the ones made of basalt, granite, diorite. And, you know, I'd suggested that they were softened and then rehardened, which is possible. But there's also multiple examples of machining of stone in Egypt as well. They did it both ways, you know, and I think that would depend on the application, which they would choose. So I don't know for sure if those vases were made with softening or with, you know, some sort of advanced tool. I don't know. But the point is that they're too impressive for that time period, especially considering they're pre-pyramid. So again, this was another reason, because of these very impressive vases and other ornate plates and bowls and things that just don't make sense to look at. People again will conflate that with the pyramids and say, well, then it must be from that same time period. And no, it's not. I think that at best those are leftover Atlantean things, which is possible. Or, again, this mystery school was sort of at play already, which I don't know. I can't really make an argument for that. I think it's more likely that's Atlantean stuff. Also, this is very important. The goddamn Sphinx. We think, because in our current paradigm, that the constellation Leo is a lion, and that the Sphinx at one time lined up with Leo, and that the Sphinx now is a lion. That means that the constellation Leo was always a lion called Leo, and that the Sphinx was always a lion. And that's just probably not true. A lot of people think that the Sphinx at one time was actually a dog, one that looks sort of like Anubis, like an Egyptian breed of dog. I think that's possible, but really it doesn't really matter. The point is that our current paradigm ends up getting slapped on top of older paradigms all the time. Historically, that's always happened. Rome is a really good example of how they would just amalgamate other cultures into their own. They created their own pantheon that basically explained, you know, all the other cultural differences with all the other cultures that they amalgamated into their own. And, you know, and they were actually fairly tolerant about it, considering the time period that they existed in. Even the Roman Catholic Church today, like you look at St. Peter's Basilica, the great, what is it? There's a big sun wheel out in the courtyard with an obelisk in the middle. It's like a big clock. And that's, you know, clearly a reference to Egypt. And I told you too, in my Tesla episode, about how grand structures like the domed building there, how they all tie back to the ancient Egyptian belief system as well. The construction style, that mystery school, the Freemasons, you know, all those groups, whatever the hell you want to call it. And that, you know, those buildings are a reference to the Sphinx. I'm going to explain that eventually. It's kind of tedious to explain how, but it all refers to, like, depending on the shape of the building and whatnot, it's a reference to the Sphinx either in the sitting position, the standing position, or the three-legged position, which is, you know, a reference to the riddle of the Sphinx in Oedipus Rex. I know I keep teasing I'm going to reveal the riddle of the Sphinx eventually. I have to build up to that too. Again, like I just keep saying, the Egyptian thing is so complex that it's like an onion. I can't just give you the answer, because you won't understand it. Plus, I love the theater of revealing, you know. I'm into wizardry. I love being a bit of a wizard. There's, you know, I'm a light side wielder though, don't worry. My wizardry I only do for good and for entertainment purposes. Yeah, so it doesn't really matter. Point is, it doesn't really matter what the Sphinx was. I like it being a lion now, though, because in our current paradigm, that's going to make it 1,000 times easier to explain. And the fact that it has a face on it, you know, people, that's something I pointed out, that the face is obviously the latest addition to it. So like if it was made in stages, that would have been the last stage. And the question is, who the hell's face is it? I know whose face it is. I recognize that face, guys. I know who it is, even with the nose gone. I recognize that fucking face. And you know what is amazing, though, is that the context, even though the Sphinx has existed in 2 or 3 different variations over the millennia, it still maintains its original context completely. That's mind-blowing. That every culture that maintained its context as well. What's amazing about this is that I know that there's people that know this shit. You know, the more about this that I learn and figure out, the more I realize that there's obviously people that know this. It's just, I really don't understand why the way they communicate it. Because they hide it in their movies. I'm sure you've heard this before. But they describe this stuff in movies in, like, code. And I don't know why. I don't, like, some people that are really pattern seeking and notice this kind of thing in the conspiracy theory community will say that, you know, they're scouting for people that can figure it out. I don't think so. I think that what they're doing is bragging to each other how much they know about it. Like in the same way that like the Masons do it, like they hide it in the logos of their companies and stuff like that. I guess maybe it just makes them feel superior that they know things that we don't know, right? And I guess that's sort of part of the romance of what drives me to learn this stuff so much, is that I know that I'm learning stuff that other people had to join a club to learn or whatever. I mean, that's sort of fun. I do have one other major motivation. This is something that I've not really told a lot of people about this. Even like my friends, I don't really tell this. But you guys, I've been encouraging you guys to write in a lot, you know? And it's been encouraging me to be more and more open about my weird experiences that I've had. Well, eventually I'm going to explain the really, really weird experience I had as a kid that basically like set me into being interested in this sort of thing like a million years ago when I was a kid. And I'm hoping that, you know, because I'm waiting till the end of like multiple episodes of having you guys tell me your intimate experiences with strange occurrences, that it'll be more likely that you'll believe me when I tell you what I went through. That'll be fun too. That I have so much. Yeah, my brain has just been like piecing together like a whole series of episodes of Tinfoil Helmet. I think that I've got 3 in my head. So the next one, and this is what I'm basically leading up to, is the next one I'm going to be talking about like I don't know what I'm going to title it yet. I don't just want the word Jesus in the title. Seems tacky. But I'm sure that many of you have heard the concept of how there is like prototypical Jesuses in every culture. Some figure that died and was resurrected. You know, Egypt, the later paradigm of what that meant in Egypt was Osiris, which was represented by the constellation Orion. Yeah, he was chopped up into pieces and reassembled. Yeah, I don't want to give too much of that away. Like I said, I want to stick to this external context that's going to help you guys understand that episode better. But basically, I'm going to be talking about all those different figures and how they tie together, and then how that all lines up with this same hero's journey. this, whatever this event was that happened 12,000 years ago, that, you know, the Giza Plateau is a time capsule too. How that all ties in together with those figures, and how all the characters in the story, how they all basically describe the events that happened during that time. Then I'm going to lead into an episode. Basically, it's going to be the one where I reveal the riddle of the Sphinx and describe, well, you know what, I'm not even going to say the rest, because it'll just be a huge spoiler. And then yeah, then probably after that I'm gonna do one more about the technology. Atlantis, I don't like to talk about Atlantis a ton, because there's just so little that we can know about it. But I am also going to do one more episode on Atlantis, talking about the location. You know, there's a handful of really good locations where it could have possibly have been. But then also how it ties into the cone heads, how it ties into the story told by Plato of Poseidon and his 10 sons, who were 10 kings, and how that matches up with something that's in the Bible that you wouldn't know was in the Bible unless you read the Dead Sea Scrolls, because somebody, it's not even mistranslated. It was not something that was lost through mistranslation. Somebody intentionally changed it. But anyways, it's a good segue back into Giza here. That Giza, the pyramids, are also in the Bible in 2 locations. I don't have that right in front of me. I'm not one of those guys that can remember exact verse and number. I'm just better at remembering things that it says. But one point, it's referred to as the Mountain of God. And there's no real context to say that that's specifically the Pyramid of Giza. But there are several Bible scholars that believe that that's what it means, the Mountain of God. Because people believe historically that the Great Pyramid and the pyramids of Giza were considered mountains. And if you can imagine that, you know, looking at them, there might have been a time when people were not really sure how they were built. They forgot how they were built, or they didn't understand the principle behind it. They would have thought that it was divine on some level. And of course, with their immense size, they really are the size of mountains. They're enormous. And then the other time, it's referred to as the Mountain of the West, or the Mountains of the West. And west of that location was, you know, Giza, of course. So, right. So there's reason to believe that the pyramids were in existence when the Hebrews were in Egypt. There is reason to believe that the Hebrews were in Egypt because there are depictions of people with, you know, loincloths that have tassels underneath them, and it appears as if their hair is matty or curly, which seems to line up with what we consider the Hebrews to have been ethnically at the time. Okay, this is the fun part. This is the fun part. So remember the technology. So in the Tesla video, I described how there are all these parks in around the world that have like a government-y sort of building with a dome or a tower. On one end of the park, there's usually a fountain and or a pillar in the center of the park, and then on the other end is some sort of round building. Usually it's round, it's sometimes square, and it usually has an open top or open sides. And I called them parks over and over and over again. This was another thing I was sort of proud of, because even though, you know, there were a lot of people that had sort of suggested that these old buildings were somehow tied into this atmospheric energy that I was talking about, nobody had really pieced it together in a way that I was satisfied with. And when I, you know, was looking around my own town, because I had such an intimate knowledge of the structures in my own town that fit this description because of my time as a tour guide, and a lot of these locations had been converted to museums and whatnot, so I had taken tours of them many, many times. I was able to see it, you know. It's just like, I can't even describe it. It's just like I could just see it. And it was like this wicked epiphany moment. Now, I sort of flubbed the description of the layout of the Giza Plateau to make it work. Because, you know, the Great Pyramid does not line up with the Sphinx. The Sphinx lines up with the Khafre Pyramid, not the Khufu Pyramid. But essentially, the principle's the same. It doesn't really matter which location the water is being inlet from. I think that there are 3 inlet locations, one for each of the pyramids. That's the main point. There is this big hole between the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid that was probably where, or sorry, the Khafre Pyramid, and that's probably where a giant obelisk was, which would have doubled as a sundial, of course. And then with the pyramid in the back, that worked as the system, the 3-structure system, and that's how they would have extracted electricity. What I didn't say was what they called these back then. I kept saying it was a park, and the reason I called it that is because we call them that today. And what's really, really interesting is I actually come from a line of horticulturalists. My father and my grandfather both worked for this city that I live in, maintaining these parks. And my grandfather even is responsible for designing many of them and designing many of the features in them. But they, you know, they never told me anything like about this shit ever. You know, I was never let in on this. So I don't know if they knew. I've never asked. My grandfather's passed now, so I can't anyways. If either of them knew, it would have been my grandfather. But no, they, like, I don't know. They never said shit about this. So it's really only a coincidence that, you know, I figured this out. But the reason I point this out is because in the ancient times, that role of the one who maintained the parks, as it were, that was essentially the king. That was the ruler of that society, and the society would have been ruled around those parks, you know, because of the, you know, the different benefits, the ionized air, ionized water, and then of course electricity, would have brought those cultures. But they didn't call them parks. They called them gardens. I'm intentionally pausing for dramatic effect, because I'm hoping that some of you will figure this out before I actually finish my thought. The garden in Egypt was, and still is to this day, the most impressive one ever built. Now, when the Egyptians ran it, they called it Chemet. That's where we get the word chemistry from, to give you an idea of just how fucking smart they were. Like, we know that the people who built the pyramids, in the time that essentially we know they were built, were obviously into some ancient crazy knowledge, hidden knowledge, from probably the Atlantean time, and they used that knowledge to build the pyramids. And they did it during this time of complete darkness when the rest of the world had basically nothing. But why are they marking this 12,000-year-old location? What is the significance of the plateau? Why does it tie to this event? Each pyramid lines up, yes, with the Belt of Orion. You know, and we know that the Belt of Orion is important to the story because many cultures sort of make reference to this. Even Gilgamesh, his description and the way he's drawn in his profile sort of looks like Orion with one arm up. He's got a sword across his belt on an angle, which is on an angle very much like Orion's belt is. And then he's got tassels between his legs, representing those stars that are between Orion's legs. And if you notice, one of those stars is sort of golden-y color. Like, that's kind of the dominant color that comes from between his legs. That's why Osiris, the green god of Egypt, had a golden wiener, because the stars are golden between his legs. Yes. So the Great Pyramid itself is the most significant one. It's the one that has the most complex interior. It's the one that seems to be the most competently built as well of the three, or of the 9, which, you know, of course is crazy because it's the oldest. It's also the one that seems to be tied to the idea of death and rebirth, because the king's chamber, you know, the coffin, the sarcophagus in the center is empty, which many people suggest means that he's resurrected, which is interesting poetry, but I'm not entirely sure that that's exactly what I think that there was actually something that was supposed to go in there. And it was the Egyptian version of the Ark of the Covenant, but, you know, maybe that's an argument for another episode. But if you look at the exterior is fairly weathered, but we know that at one point it would have been very sheen with shiny white limestone, and very likely had an ornate capstone on the top, and was probably very beautiful to look at, reflected a lot of sunlight, and maybe, you know, some suggested glowed at night because of the electricity, which is possible. But there's a really weird detail about the lower half. So we can tell that the entranceway where the man-made crafted limestone begins, when you enter on that level, that's actually lower than the highest point of the foundation. The foundation of the Great Pyramid climbs up the further into the interior you get. There was already a stone platform there. And it looks like it was probably worked on a little bit, you know, to make the pyramid sit on it better. But that stone platform wasn't just some random hill that was there. That was the holy site that existed on that location before the pyramids were built. That is the part of the island of the Giza Plateau that dates back to before 12,000 years ago. And you know what? Probably much, 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 much older than that. I keep hinting in my videos that the time period around 30,000 years ago is very special to our overall history. I often compare it to the Lord of the Rings because of just how complex it was with all the different species of human, and the fact that they clearly were much more complex, cultured, educated back then than, you know, modern historians and archaeologists will give them credit for. And I found multiple examples to prove that. Well, I wouldn't be surprised, and this is, I'm not the first one saying this. This is, I'll gladly admit that I'm standing on the shoulders of more dedicated researchers than I when I make this assertion. But this location seems as if it dates back to around that time as well. Some people have said even 40,000 years ago, which, you know what the hell? What's another 10,000 years when you're talking that far back, right? It doesn't really matter exactly when, though. The point is that 12,000 years ago we know is not the inception point, because that doesn't make any sense. That's directly after the Great Disaster, or directly before, to be more specific. So what that means is that we're talking about when it was destroyed, not when it was built. And I love like reminding people like just how old we're talking. Like Göbekli Tepe is like around that time as well. Maybe older, maybe upwards of 14,000 years old. Yeah, the way I put it in tinfoil helmet, to just give you an idea of how long ago we're talking, is Jesus was 2,000 years ago. Sumeria, when we originally thought that civilization began, was 3 Jesuses ago. And for as ancient as Sumeria is to us, Göbekli Tepe was to the Sumerians. And there's lots of hints at Göbekli Tepe that the knowledge that they displayed through their architecture at that time obviously predated the site, because it was far too complex and ornate and adept for the first ever civilization point. Yeah, I don't want to give away too much more, which is perfect timing because we're almost back at the top of the hour here. I don't think it's the craziest thing in the world to think that people have been organizing since well before Göbekli Tepe. That humanity developed all sorts of different interesting skills before then. So when I tell you that there are examples of construction on the Giza Plateau that predate the 12,000 year ago mark, I hope you don't think that I'm totally crazy, but I need to explain the 2 examples that make me fairly confident we're talking about an extremely ancient site. Now, the well in the basement leads me to believe that this site functioned as a garden machine in its original conception. So way back. Like, this is, if you want to get real, this is the real Atlantean shit. So the well suggests that this site always sort of functioned this way. That this was a natural principle, the way that the flowing ionized water with ionized air, with the structure system, that this is something people figured out forever ago. That this is like a truly lost, forgotten thing that very few people ever talk about anymore, if anybody does. You know, if it's in this hidden esoteric world. Before I talk about the basement room or the well room, one site inside the Great Pyramid that's truly perplexing is that there seems to be this like drain, and you know, it could be a liquid drain for the function of whatever the machine of the pyramid was, which is a good answer. The other could be there was like an electrical cable that ran through there, which that's fun, but probably not. But this drain, you can sort of travel through some of it, and there's this portion at the top of the foundation, like just inside of the foundation, basically, inside of the Great Pyramid, where there's all these complex stones that have been cut to perfect precision so you can't even fit a slice of paper between them. this like totally adept structure, but they're inside this little hole. It's like this sand fort. It's like this little hutch, this little cubby or cave, where the walls are made mostly out of just like earth, sand, dirt, little stones. When people go in there, they have to be very careful not to touch anything because it's delicate and brittle in there. It's packed in pretty tight apparently, but it has weathered away since it was originally discovered, obviously. But it's like such a bizarre... Why is just this little sand hole in the middle of this like beautiful ornate structure? Well, that obviously dates back to the original religion. This is what the shaman class would do. They were probably doing this in Göbekli Tepe. We know that they were doing this in many Neolithic societies. Is the shaman would take some sort of mind-altering substance, and then they would climb into a hole, and then they would communicate with the spirits while they were in this hole. So this is probably that very hutch, that very hole that the shaman would climb into to communicate with God. The other interesting thing is the basement room, the well room. Again, we're talking about this like ornate, beautiful structure, and even the tunnel leading into the basement starts off looking really nice. Like it's clearly built. But then it like turns into just solid stone as they, you know, carve deeper and deeper into the foundation, the bedrock foundation. And then when you get into this well room, it's ugly. There's no other way of putting it. It's ugly down there. It looks like they just didn't give a fuck. The walls are just like bashed into whatever the hell random shape. The well itself is the nicest looking thing, and it's not really that nice looking. Then there's all these weird bulbous things sort of just in the middle of the room. And then there's even 2 levels inside. This is not random haphazard construction. You know, they wouldn't have put that much precision into the structure and then just totally screwed the pooch on the basement. This room are the remains or the ruins of what was originally in this location. This is the oldest part of the temple in this complex. And those random like bulges of stone in the middle of the room, I'm willing to bet used to be more ornate, as in architectural features or more likely statues. So this whole location truly does, you know, date back to the beginning. The beginning of everything. Like, and what's amazing about that is how much further back that is than, you know, most people realize. Basically, I'm going to argue that this was the Garden of Eden. Well, good time for a break. I've lined up 4 stories for our story submission. And you know what? I'm going to tell, just in good faith here, I'm going to tell one of my stories. It's not really a supernatural story, but I was thinking about it yesterday. It came up because I was thinking about some of my weird life stories, and this is kind of an interesting one, I guess. But yes, I'm going to walk away for about 3 minutes, rehydrate here really quick, let you guys listen to some more Sam Tar. Link in the description to his channel. Mother of the Void is my favorite song of his. Yeah, that's another subject I can't wait to talk about. The religion thing, you know, the mother goddess, the triple goddess concept, how that ties into our current understanding of the Trinity. Ooh. Either you guys are going to think that I'm the craziest person ever, or... Oh no, that's basically it. That's your only option. Thank you for enabling my insanity one more night, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate it so much. I love you guys. If you want your voices heard, if you want to be included in the viewer submissions, you can send your first-hand or second-hand account of something supernatural or unexplained that happened to you to fullmetaltuxedo@gmail.com. I get submissions all the time, though I am looking for some more. I know that there's a bunch of stories I haven't gotten to yet, but I'm going to go ahead and solicit. If you guys are holding out on me, please send your story in now. I would like to get a few more in my archive here so that I feel good and rich with them in the episodes coming up. But the best way to be heard, you can send me a super chat. I'll read super chats usually twice per episode. I record these live on Armoured Gregory on YouTube and then upload them much later, edited down onto Armoured Skeptic More, also on YouTube.
The shadows aren't your friends, and the ghosts, they'll pretend. When we're lost in a world that don't belong to us, we'll try and make a sense in things that aren't us, and we'll wonder why we don't speak.
Oh, back to me already. I feel like I barely even hydrated. Thank you again, Samtar, for letting me bootleg all your music. No, he's a fan of this show. My patrons, I'm sorry guys that I sort of neglected you the last couple weeks. My head has literally just been in piecing together the new lineup for Tinfoil Helmet. Anyways, a couple of you left some super chats though in the, the patron only chat here. Kitty Cat says, "Let's start worshiping cats again." Yeah, that is one of my favorite things about ancient Egyptian religion, is their cat veneration, and specifically how it tied into their worship of Sekhmet. Sekhmet was this destroyer goddess that looked like a black lioness, and she was created by Horus to destroy shit. And without giving too much away, it's literally the exact same duality of like Kali and Vishnu, as well as Durga and, oh, what the hell was her destroyer? Oh, that's Kali? Wait, I'm mixing up the names. Sorry, guys. Maybe I'll leave it at that at least. But that's the most one-to-one comparison between ancient Egyptian religion and any other religion on Earth is the Hindu tradition. Their pantheon functions essentially the exact same way, and their legends line up so perfectly. But then the next one, the third one, believe it or not, as crazy as it sounds, is the ancient South American religion. But, it's going to take a long time to tie those together. But of course, it also, like I keep alluding, it's all major religions tie back to it, to the ancient Egyptian belief, as well as the Abrahamic faith. And what's sort of interesting about that is the way that it sort of bounces back and forth. How, like, these Abrahamic ideas keep getting amalgamated back into the pagan belief systems as, they sort of get conquered, especially during the Roman time. But what's amazing, though, is that it works the other way around, too. Because as these Christian groups amalgamate into these pagan beliefs, they're also sort of becoming more tolerant of them to make it easier for the people to buy into the new belief system. And also, like I said, when the Hebrews left Egypt, they took a lot of the religion with them and just made it their own. Like it was, but during their time in Babylon as well, a lot of what we know of as the, you know, the Torah and the Old Testament, a lot of that was sort of reimagined. I don't know the correct way of putting it, but they essentially like started assembling these works during that time. And that's how, very much the exact same way as they differentiated themselves from their captors in Egypt by following their Hebrew traditions, which, like, the whole point of the Hebrew tradition, right up until the point when supposedly the Messiah was born, was about maintaining this unique culture that the point of it is that it is distinct from everyone. And it, even though, you know, a lot of the functions of the Egyptian religion come into the fold in the Hebrew belief system, it does essentially become very, very unique. But like I said, it too amalgamated ideas. So when they were in Babylon, they ended up sort of absorbing a lot of the cultural concepts that existed at that time, you know, and they would have known during their time there that they had flood stories, you know, that they had their own creation stories, and that they were all very similar, and that they were describing the same beginning of the world, but with different characters, different contexts, and different moral lessons. You know, that wouldn't have been lost on them. And I'm sure that it's like, it's very likely that you know, that some of the better ideas like evolved and got amalgamated into the Hebrew belief system. And the same thing happens with the Christian belief system. Christianity itself was like an evolution of the Abrahamic belief system. You know, like the Gnostic belief basically is that Jesus came along and was like, okay, like that whole thing with God, like, yeah, we're done with that. Now we're evolving to the next level. Now we're about love. You know, like, so there is like a recognition of evolution in that belief system as well. But the thing is, though, that a lot of things that we consider Christian are stuff that was actually already tradition in Europe, because a lot of what we know as Christianity now is the Europeanized version of it, the Romanized, to be more specific, version of it, which is so wildly, drastically different from what the earliest believers believed. So anyways, I agree, Cat. We should worship cats again. Thank you for your super chat. And Hunter says, Zahi Hawass, I wonder how much more we would know about Egypt if it wasn't for his monopoly on archaeological expeditions and sketchy shit with Egyptian iniquities. Hunter, I could go on for fucking hours about my qualms with Zahi Hawass. He is, if you're not familiar, the head of Egyptology in Egypt. He is essentially the god of Egypt. And he is the most insufferable, intolerant antiquities holder on the planet. And the fact that he even still has his job is amazing, considering he got fired for being somewhat involved in the illegal trade of Egyptian artifacts. But there's also one thing that people are very confident that he stole, because there was this robot that went into one of those vent tunnels, and they found a block, but the block had 2 brass handles on it. And then he would have been one of the very few people that could have had access to that. And when they went back to look at them again, the brass handles were gone. But that's not even the worst one. That's not even the one he got caught for, I don't think. I don't know. They didn't publicize everything. And they probably wouldn't want to talk about it much now because, like I said, he's back to being the head of Egyptology. But, oh my God. Like, one example is we know for sure that there are tunnels between the Great Sphinx and the pyramids. This is something I've argued several times before. But he won't allow cameras or people down into the chambers beneath the Sphinx to see for themselves. And he just kept denying it and denying it and denying it. Then finally one day, he climbs down. He doesn't allow a camera down, so you can't see what he's seeing. You can just see him down there. And he looks from left, and he looks right, and he goes, "See, there's nothing down here." Dude, what? Like, you can't make this shit up. They're this fucking brazen. They couldn't... This is just like the whole world we live in, though, isn't it? It's just, we know that it's not what they tell us it is, but they just refuse to admit it when we catch them on it. Anyways. Thank you, Hunter. So I've got a couple stories for you here. First one is from Mike Matthews. "Hey buddy, I've been a fan of yours for 4 or 5 years now, and I'm absolutely loving the new video format. I was watching the Full Metal Tuxedo podcast one day, and one of your Shadow People stories you read retrieved something from the depths of my mind that I had completely forgotten about. I couldn't have been older than 7 or 8, and I was playing hide and seek with my sister, who was about 3 years younger than me. For context, I'm currently 18, so this wasn't much more than a decade ago. We were in our house, and it was well lit, as it was daytime. I walked down the hallway towards her room, and as I looked into her doorway, I very clearly saw a silhouette, which was roughly the size of a small child, dart directly away from me, leap into the air, jumping partially over the bed, and landing silently on the opposite side of it. The way the bed was angled, my view of the spot that the being had landed was completely obstructed by it. My sister had a pile of many stuffed animals, some small, some large, on that side of the bed. So thinking I had found her, I began digging through them. I soon realized she was nowhere in sight, even checking under the bed, and it dawned on me what had happened. I left her room and went to my room, where I found her hiding in my closet. Although I knew it was impossible that she could have snuck by me, I still asked her if she had hid in her room, to which she was very confused, since she hadn't left my room at all. I explained to her what I had saw, and at first she laughed at the idea of it, but she soon realized how terrifying what I described was, and completely freaked out and nearly began crying when I insisted that I was dead serious. To calm her down, I told her I probably just imagined it, since I had assumed she was hiding in her room. The detail even makes me skeptical about what I saw, but I'm extremely certain about what I saw. The detail that made me remember about this incident was that you said shadow people don't just vanish, they run off in a direction. Okay, so he's referencing something that I've said many times. Shadow people is the... I tell a lot of shadow people stories, you know, that's the one that I sort of, I lean on a lot when I talk to you guys. But that's because that is my most common experience. And the vast majority of the times when I see them with my eyes, as in when I know they're there because I literally am seeing a physical representation of some dark figure physically in front of me, as soon as my eyes lock on it, it darts away, but it never disappears. It never fades away. It always moves away, and very, very quickly, wildly quickly. It's usually like a head and shoulders poking around a corner. So I don't usually go chasing after it when I see that, because by the time it takes me to get up to look, that whatever it wasn't real and is gone. But sometimes, like there's this one that pretends to be my cat or whatever. It looks like a cat. It's the size of a cat at least. Like I've seen it in full manifestation directly in front of me several times. And the last time I saw it, it ran into the bathroom. Like darted, again, running is not really a good description. It darted into the bathroom. And I followed it in there and called my cat, and my cat came out from a different room. Anyways, this is not about me. We're past the part of the show that's about me. This is about you guys. Okay. Oh, the other thing they'll do sometimes is just stand still. And that's happened to me a couple times. The one that I call the hat, that they call the Hat Man. He would never move. He would just stand there. And yeah, other figures, I've heard lots of stories too of them standing at the ends of people's beds or just standing in people's rooms. So I know that I'm not the only person that's just seen them stand still. And then other people say that they can see them sort of in the spirit, as in like, I guess it's like, you call it like a third eye thing or whatever, or you see them psychically maybe, is that you just know that they're there, but your eyeballs are not literally seeing their physical manifestation. But whatever. Different possibilities, different theories, maybe even different kinds of beings. Okay. So yeah, they run off into a direction, and that is exactly what happened here. However, it wasn't in the corner or edge of my vision. It was directly in the center of my field of view. Rather than running off to the side, it ran directly away from me, which seems to make this situation somewhat unique because of the direction it ran. I saw the shadow person for at least a second, maybe two. Okay, if you guys have ever seen shadow people, 2 seconds is an eternity. They're that fast. Like, I wouldn't even say 1 second. Like, way faster than that. It's like a blink. It's so fast that the reason why it's so shocking that they move so quickly is that it actually makes it hard for you to really remember what it is that you're seeing, and it makes you question if what you saw was real or not, which I wonder if isn't like an intentional part of their game, where like they move just fast enough that you can't really be sure if it was in your mind or not. Like it's like low-key energy, like trickster energy. A lot of people associate shadow people with tricksters. Okay. The Kentucky Goblins. They're definitely tricksters. Lots of different types of trickster energy. Alright. Because this entity was approximately the size and shape of my sister, it makes me wonder if it was some sort of spirit toying with me, trying to mislead me into believing it was my sister. Or perhaps it was simply a baby ghost who wanted to play hide and seek with us. Smiley face. Dun dun dun. That was dramatic effect added by me because the smiley face sort of ruined the vibe I was going for. My house isn't that old. It was built in the 70s, so likely not haunted. I'm still not entirely sure what to make of this phenomenon, but thought you might be able to shed some light on the subject. I hope this story wasn't too boring, and if you read this far, I really appreciate it. Have a great day, Mike. Thank you very much, Mike. that was actually a spectacular story. Because it perfectly fed into my existing delusion. So thank you for validating my crazy world that I hold inside of my head. Yeah, that was like so typical, so perfect. And it's actually very similar to a story my sister once told me. I'm not going to give that story away. I'm going to let her tell it if she's ever on. Okay, so this next one is an audio file. But before I hit play, there is a little bit of text here. Hey, skeptic. That's me. Just to say I really appreciate what you do. I love your podcasts, and it helped me finally be able to talk about my story. All right. So I'm not going to give away any of his story here. I'm just going to play the file for you guys.
This was in East England, Blackpool specifically, a few years ago. I was around 16 at the time, and I was visiting with my family. It was like a short weekend holiday type of thing, and I really wanted to go to the beach the whole time we were there. It's on the seaside, but I didn't have a chance. We were too busy. We were doing other things, and I basically didn't have a moment to myself until we were back at the hotel. So that night, it was a Saturday night, I decided I'd just go alone. I didn't mind it was dark and cold. I just wanted to go for the sea breeze, and it was nice that it was an empty beach anyway, no other tourists there. So I went there, and I put on my big coat. I went there, and so there I was, enjoying the moon as much as you can in England, you know, with all the clouds and rain. And I'm not sure how long I spent there, but after a while I saw someone or something walking down the beach towards me. It was dark, but I could make out a distinct enough shape. It was humanoid of some kind, and at first I thought it was just some guy, maybe someone who took care of the beach, coming to tell me I shouldn't be there, or if, you know, they're closing up, or I'm not too sure. I've never been there before. I wasn't sure how it worked, but it eventually got closer, and I realized it wasn't just any sort of man that I've saw before. It was this huge and bulky and heavy kind of humanoid type thing. And as it kept getting closer, and at first I thought I could just see a silhouette because of how dark it was, and with the lights of the town in the background and things like that. But eventually I realized it was because its skin, whatever it was, had this rough texture, and it was just as black as coal. It shone in the moonlight. It kind of glistened, but it was too dark to really make out any distinct shape of any kind. And the only thing that really stood out was this row of bright and sharp teeth and glowing yellow eyes. That as they got closer, I realized they were not where I'd assume eyes and teeth should be, not the size that they should be, if you know what I mean. And it eventually got close enough for me to be able to hear it. I'll hear it if it shouted. And this deep and gruff voice escapes with the strangest accent I've ever heard. I wasn't too sure. I couldn't understand a single word. But before I knew it, it was close enough to me to kind of make out the pace it was going, and I could tell it was starting to speed up. It walked at me with just these arms outstretched, these huge hands outstretched towards me. At that point, I felt like I couldn't move, but then suddenly this kind of warmth spread over my body, and I kind of just jumped to life, and I started running. And I heard the voice behind me as I was running away from it, and the tone of it, I still remember now. It was almost like a warning or a call out of some kind, and it's something along the lines of like, "Why boy?" But I couldn't really understand. It was me like a what, where? I'm not too sure. I ran all the way back to the hotel, just sweating, and my legs were burning. And it wasn't until I got back that I realized I didn't have any air in my lungs. I had to just breathe and hyperventilate. And I never really told anyone about this. The next day we went back to the beach together. before any tourists were there. It was still empty, and I never brought it up to anyone, but I did see that there were 2 footsteps in the sand. There were mine and something a lot bigger as well, something barefoot. It looked like a human foot, but much larger. And yeah, that's about it. I tried to recall as much as I could, but I'm not. If I think of anything else, I'll let you know. But that's all I could recall from that night. That's everything. Thank you.
Well, that story was the coolest shit ever. That was so well told. I hope I get the point across that the thing that I praise the most in your stories, guys, is your ability to tell them. And god damn, you guys tell some amazing stories. So yeah, you know what's funny is, even though I had just done a shadow person story, right, 2 seconds ago, this story was in the shadow people folder, but then I read the description again, and it was just about a dark giant humanoid, and I was just like, wait, that's not a shadow person. So yeah, I was right. Definitely not 2 shadow people in a row. I wonder what that was. So he suggests in the email here that it might have been a Wendigo. I guess that works. I'm not sure I was totally able to immerse myself in the description too well. I guess that you did sort of have trouble seeing it, but it actually kind of shocked me when you described seeing teeth and glowing yellow eyes. I almost wanted to say Wolfman, because even with the human like feet, that's, people sort of describe wolfmen or dogmen or whatever as having human feet. But I mean, it does sort of just sound like your typical Bigfoot-esque creature, you know. Maybe some extra-dimensional creature was having a little bit of fun with the character creator and made some off-color Bigfoot Wolfman mix. But yeah, the fact that it was you know, speeding up, approaching you, and then it seemed to have some kind of language. Fucking terrifying. God, you totally gripped me with that shit, dude. Absolutely. And oh, I love the part where you're stumbling over trying to recreate it. Made it so real. Again, to quote Art Bell, if you send in a story, guys, it better be true. And if it's not true, it better be convincing. Another perfect example. I hope I don't lose my voice again. Doing this more frequently, you know, definitely has helped my voice. Like, part of this, I know that I say you guys are like some dumb lab rat guinea pigs for me, enduring me building up my skills as a public speaker. I've always been very good at public speaking, you know. I actually, nerdily enough, won a bunch of gold medals in public speaking in elementary school. And, you know, I did acting a lot. I acted a lot, stage and on camera. And I even did improv for a full year, both during the school year, and also I joined like an alumni group, basically, in the summer afterwards. So I've always been used to, you know, talking to people, but it's a whole other thing as a YouTuber to present your own stuff, to get in front of a camera and just like be like, hey, so Nikola Tesla knew what the pyramids were. Like, it takes a little bit of confidence to do that. But also, you know, being the mascot and the presenter of your own ideas just in general is, you know, it puts a lot of pressure on you. So, you know, it took me a little while, even though I've been doing it for a while, doing the Tell Me More series, doing it every single week for several months in a row. It forced me out of my comfort zone. It forced me to get better at just doing this, you know, and this part, the podcast, is really about being able to ramble for a couple hours at a time, you know, about whatever I've got at the top of my head, and then also reading your stuff or whatever, and being able to maintain my voice for that whole time. Because, you know, I take too good care of my voice. You know, I know it's my moneymaker and everything, but I gotta be able to build some endurance on it. Okay, speaking of which, I'm rambling and increasing the likelihood that I'll lose my voice before the end of the show. So this is a sleep paralysis story. This is from C, and C was kind enough to add some details that was just for me. Yeah, feel free, guys, that if you want to add some details that you don't want on the show, that makes me feel very special. So thank you for that. Like, I talk to people all the time that have all these wacky, crazy, unexplainable stories. It's been giving me like a much greater appreciation for this whole side of the world, the people that are open to this kind of thing. Because there is like a really huge disconnect between people who not believe, but are open to believing things that, you know, don't fit the normal. And people who just have this staunch unwillingness to believe. There is, and it's really great, you know, considering that I've only just been doing this for like a little over a year now, and you guys already trust me, even though I was like making fun of people that were saying stuff like this a few years ago. I mean, that's very brave of you guys, and I promise not to destroy that trust. So, you know, the point I'm getting at is feel free to share your stories with me without worrying that I'm going to tell everybody everything that you've shared. If you say in an email, the whole thing can just be for me. That's fine. You can trust I'm not going to blurt your story out. I understand that these are very intimate things to people, which is why I like to share my story as well. Which, you know what, I think I'm going to tell my story. It's not I'm going to tell my story after this email. It's not a supernatural thing, but it was sort of weird, you know, because I got thinking about it, and it was sort of weird. So anyways, hi Greg. Please call me C. The story I'm about to tell you happened to me this December on the 19th. I've been watching your channels since around 2014. God, so many of these emails are from people that say that they've been watching me since basically the beginning. Guys, that is such an honor. Thank you so much. And, you know, and that just goes right into what I was saying. Like, you guys know that I was making fun of this shit, and you still trust me. Like, that's amazing. That's beautiful, guys. I love you guys so much. I know every YouTuber says it, but I genuinely love you guys. It's such a beautiful experience, doing this with you guys. All right, so I went from being Eastern Orthodox to atheist and now polytheist. Ooh, that is quite the journey. And you know what parallels a couple of my friends, to be frank? It's an interesting journey. Sleep paralysis experience. I've experienced sleep paralysis many times in the past couple of years, so I'm more than very familiar to how they work and how to get my body to snap me out of it. What happened in December, however, left me baffled and has since reinforced my belief in the spiritual and the divine. So the build-up. I've been having... I like how you've organized this, by the way. I've been having trouble sleeping for a couple of months prior. My sleep would be disturbed. I'd feel an aura of dread around me, or just fear of going to bed and fear of death. One day in December, I decided to try praying to see if it would help. I've done so after being an atheist for a decade, and I did it to see if it would help, and it did. A couple of days thereafter, I did not pray, and my sleep went back to being disturbed. So I've decided to try it again, and it worked. Then in December 19th, I meditated after praying and wrote down what happened immediately after waking up. Okay, so I must interject here. I know that I've mentioned this before, but I always found it really fascinating how many sleep paralysis stories end with, I was an atheist, but I prayed to Jesus and it stopped. It's like, even some people said they couldn't talk because the paralysis wouldn't let them move their mouth, but they were able to hum, and they hummed the melody to yes, Jesus loves me, and they said that made it go away. That one blew my mind, you know. But I have heard people say that praying to other things has helped too. I don't know. I have those stories are less frequent. I'm wondering, you know, if because you talked about being polytheist now, if you're going to lead into that. Okay. A couple days thereafter, I did not pray, went back to being disturbed. So on December 19th, I meditated, praying, and wrote down what happened immediately after waking up. December 19th. The whole day was a day where I was active the entire time. And when I went to bed at my usual hour, between 3 and 4 a.m., but I wasn't sleepy. If anything, I was still super awake, and my body itself was not tired. When I pray, I do to 3 gods. Yeah, well, I called it, didn't I? The one I perceive as my main god. Sleep and dreams. And night. After praying, I decided to try meditating and do so while thinking of my primary god and try to get in touch with it. Interesting. I wonder who your primary god is. So the experience. My body was getting heavier and heavier, and I began perceiving sounds. They weren't the usual sounds of cars outside of my neighborhood. It was sort of noise moving around me. In my room, I also felt a presence moving around, and I could feel some sort of touch on my forehead or cheek. My hands became cold as dead body, and I couldn't move them. I tried doing what I did when in sleep paralysis to jolt me out of it. Yet it did not work until I asked my God to allow me to move my hand. And almost immediately my hands warmed up, and I realized that I had lost any sense of where they were. I had thought and felt like they were by my side, or sitting on a rock or something, when in fact they were placed on my chest. That's when I also realized that I had completely lost any sense of my legs, and that the only thing I truly had any sense of was my mind, so to say. When my body was getting heavier and heavier, I felt like my hands were turning into rocks. When I realized that I had lost sense of my legs, I also realized that I had legs. It was a weird moment to describe, but best way to put it is like it's, oh, I have legs. That's interesting. That same noise I mentioned above, it was also accompanied by a feeling of being surrounded by something, a sort of jelly-like substance. One thing that stood out to me while I was perceiving all these things happening to me was that I was seeing light in front of me where there was no light turned on in my room. Oh, crazy. Almost like you had wicked night vision? Or that's interesting. Or coming from outside. My eyes were closed, and I could see for the first time ever colors and forms in front of me. There were constantly shifting patterns that were colorful, not a bright, vivid light, but through a blanket of darkness. They were almost exactly like the kind of things people that take DMT describe. All right. Besides these patterns, there was a light that kept fading in and out of reality, and it did so independently of where I was looking. During that whole time, I was talking with the god, so to say. It was me talking while all the things I've detailed above were happening. The session ended when I asked the god to end it, and when I said goodbye to that place, the whole sense of being surrounded by a substance, the sound, the noise, the images, the shifting light I was seeing, the pressure, everything just vanished, and I felt light and had a complete sense of my body and everything around me, and I moved as if nothing had happened, and almost immediately fell into unconsciousness and woke up the following morning. Thank you for looking this one over. I know it's been a long one, and you requested short stories. No, this one is actually pretty much the average length. Everybody's been writing them about this long. But I struggled with finding a way to shorten it. You're awesome. Keep doing what you're doing. Thanks, bud. I really appreciate your story. It almost sounds like you described sort of inducing a sleep paralysis state. And you're not the first person I've heard do that. Okay, so... Okay, I know that I try to share stories with you guys all the time, you know? And I've been racking my brain, because it's probably been a little while since I've shared a personal story, and I like to sort of mix them in from time to time. And I don't want to, you know, again, risk being a broken record and talk about another shadow person encounter, because I talk about that all the time. I couldn't think of anything supernatural off the top of my head, though like I did hint that there is one really interesting one that I'm going to tell you guys eventually. Really got to build up the nerve for that. But this one is sort of weird. I guess what's sort of maybe supernatural about it is the level of confidence I had in a situation that I should have had absolutely none in. One time I was in middle school, and my middle school was in the same building as a high school, the high school I eventually went to. And one day my social group and I, like the guys I would usually spend most of my time with, we were leaving the school, and it was raining, and I believe there was 4 of us, and we were sharing 2 umbrellas between the 4 of us, and it was our tradition at the time to walk home. We had the option of taking the bus, but we were too fucking cool for that, guys. We walked home. Anyways, we didn't even get to the end of the front driveway of the school, and 2 guys looked at least 15, so like grade 10-ish, but they could have been older, I don't really remember. They stopped us, and they said, basically threatened us for our umbrellas and demanded that we hand them over. And I just like didn't care. And I'm gonna explain that. I'm going to explain that, because that's the weird part of this story, is the fact that I didn't care. But so we like refused, but the 4 of us didn't move, right? We were kind of almost like we were curious, like, what is it that is happening to us? I think that was sort of the sensation I was experiencing at the time. Like, what is this strange occurrence that I am now experiencing? Why have I been stopped at the end of this driveway and been made demand of my umbrella? Good day. And they're like, no, You're gonna give us the umbrellas. And I swear to fucking God, they pulled out a gun and pointed it right at me. And in a normal situation, like, I can see any other person, right, being afraid in this moment. But for some reason, I was not washed with emotion. I was not in shock. I was completely calm. I just didn't care. And all I can say is I just knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was not going to get shot. And a lot of that was circumstantial, right? I'm literally at the end of the driveway at my school. Like, there are dozens of people within eyeshot of us in that general vicinity, you know? It's not that long after school, so there's still people coming and going. Plus, we're being threatened for an umbrella. Like, that's obviously, it's like I just knew the guy was playing a game with us. Because that's just such a dumb thing to threaten somebody over. So it's just like piecing it together, I guess. I could just tell that they weren't serious, because there's no way in this situation they would do this. Anyways, the guy in the back is the one with the gun, and the guy that's sort of in the front is the one that's talking to me. The one in the front is the guy whose face I remembered when I was shown the police photos. He was the guy I was able to identify, but I actually really didn't even look at the other guy. And again, it was just because I didn't fucking care. I just wanted the situation to be over so I could go home. That's really all I was thinking. Can this be over fast, please, so I can go home? So this, like, I had like this wicked level of confidence, again, in a situation I should have had none in. So the guy in the back with the gun, he then cocks it, as in he pulls the slide back. You hear that ch-ch sound, right? He then points the gun at me again. I remain unfazed. The guy in the front then repeats his request, and he's like, oh no, we're serious. Like, we want the umbrellas. You're going to give them to us. At this whole time, I'm really just looking at the guy in the front and sort of half glancing over at the gun every time the gun's in play. And I'm just like, no. And I'm just like, no, I just want to go home. And the guy in the back's like, oh, you don't think we're serious? And then he cocks the gun again. And I'm like, again, I'm in middle school. I know nothing about guns. I'm a fucking dumb kid. But I know that the second time you cock a gun, pull the slide back, something's supposed to come out. You know, the spent shell, and if there is no spent shell, the unused bullet is supposed to come out, and nothing came out. So I don't know for sure, right? Because I'm still just a kid. But again, like, again, the pieces are coming together, and I'm just like, this is not real. This situation is not going to amount to anything. I'm going to be able to go home very soon. I'm just thinking, like, thank God this situation's almost over. So I refuse a third time. And this is the best part of the story. This is the best part. They're like, oh, you don't think it's a real gun? And the fucking idiot hands me the gun to prove to me that it's a real gun. So for the first time, I have my palm wide open because I don't want my fingerprints on this. Again, I'm just a kid, but I have enough wherewithal to know that I don't want my fingerprints on this this thing that is currently being used for criminal activity. Clearly, right in front of me, it's being used for that. So for the first time since this whole thing started, I decide to look over at my friends for the first time. And they are all shitting themselves. Their eyes are halfway out of their fucking skulls. Their tongues are out of their mouths. Their jaws are on the floor. Like, they're ghost white. Like, they're terrified. I look back at these guys. I pretend like I'm weighing the thing in my hand. Like I know how much a gun is supposed to weigh. I don't. I don't know how much a gun is supposed to weigh. I'm just like, ah, yes. Yes. A fine firearm, gentlemen. Very good. Like, it's grade 8, for Christ's sake. So I just hand him back the gun. I'm like, oh, yeah, very cool. And then like, the exchange lasts for maybe another few seconds. Very short. The guy basically respects the fact that I called their bluff. And he goes, yeah, we were just fucking with you. And then lets us go. And then, I swear to God, I cared so little about this that by the time we got home, I had almost forgotten about it. And we had, well, it wasn't my home. It was one of my bud's places. And we walked in the door. And the first thing out of his mouth when we walk in the door, he tells his mom. He says, Greg had a gun pulled on him. And I was like, oh yeah. And she's like, really? And that was when it finally dawned on me, like the severity of the situation, when I saw her reaction to it. But yeah, they ended up doing a little bit of jail for that, because apparently they had been doing it to a few other people, a couple of girls, and apparently they had a couple weapons, and they'd procured them from like one of their brothers. And yeah, they were just they never loaded them, so at very least they were not completely fucking awful. But that was some crazy shit. That was fucking crazy. But yeah, I guess the only thing I can really say about that story that's a little bit weird is just how I was so absolutely confident. And I wanted to say it wasn't like, I wasn't like ever like it definitely wasn't that I was relieved, like, oh, finally I get to die. I just like knew that nothing was gonna happen. And I just was like washed with that feeling of confidence that this is nothing. Like, not even for 1 second was I nervous. And I guess that's like because I've had other encounters. Like, I've had other people threaten me and it scared me when they had a weapon. And I've had lots of other, yeah, like near-death experiences. But something about that, I just knew from the very, very beginning. Maybe I was just read their body language and I could tell that they weren't serious. I don't know. You know, maybe it's explainable. But that was fun. Because I hadn't even thought of that story for years. Hello, Gregory. Greetings from Latvia. You can call me Chris. After listening to some of the podcast episodes, I wanted to share some odd experiences of mine that has puzzled me for years. The full story: back in 2013, I went hunting with my dad. We'd set up on opposite sides of the forest next to some crop fields. We'd sit there silently for hours, late into the night, in case any wild boars would come to feast on the crops. So in my boredom, I shone the light that was attached to my rifle in the direction of a red spot on the horizon, at what I thought was a radio tower, to see how the beam would illuminate the dust in the air. Unexpectedly, the red spot started moving gradually, so I assumed that it was actually a plane at an angle. Before long, however, I noticed that there was no sound whatsoever, and that it was headed straight in my direction. I was still sitting in the grass there when it flew directly overhead, slower than any plane would. I managed to get a good look at it in the rifle scope from below with its 10 times magnification. The image filled my entire scope. Wow. Wow. Even at low altitude. I mean, wow. That's incredible. My hands were shaking at this point. There definitely was a hull of some sort, dark and metallic, visible against the backdrop of the clouds. But what made it different from any plane were the large red lights on its bottom. 3 along the length of the hull, 1 on each wing. There were also 2 green smaller ones on the side and the back of the hull that were blinking. Those did not look like navigation lights on planes, but both were the same color, which was bizarre. And the red ones were way too big in comparison, almost like hot metal. Oh, that's crazy. You're not the first person to describe like a hot metal kind of quality to a UFO. I had my rifle pointed upwards at it, yet in the end, fear, curiosity, and stupidity didn't overcome me to the point of actually pulling the trigger. God, I just imagine what would have happened if you did, eh? God, that's so fucking cool. You literally had a UFO in your scope. God, that's the most badass shit I've ever heard. God, you guys just give me the best goddamn stories. I swear to God, you guys are so fucking awesome. Thank you so much. Wow. Just made my night. God, it's so hard to pick what's been the best story so far. Anyways, he continues or concludes by saying, "It just kept flying past, gently picking up speed, until disappearing over the horizon minutes later. It was definitely lower than 2 to 4 kilometers because it was a cloudy night. Otherwise, it would have been obstructed by them. It was definitely higher than 250 meters. That's really high up. Take this time to remind my American followers to please learn the metric system and catch up with the rest of the world. It's going to come in real handy. Because my light couldn't reach it, I shone the light at it from below. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so he was able to determine that it was too high up for his light to hit it. That's a really interesting detail. I'm sure that there was no sound because it was a silent night. Otherwise, I've heard countless planes. Yeah, I believe that. I live about 100 kilometers away from an international airport and 20 kilometers away from a regional one. I have no idea what I actually saw. A drone that's silent enough not to be audible, maybe? But why the large lights? Yeah, excellent. Excellent story. Okay. So I got one more thing, or maybe 2, in the live stream chat here for my patrons. Sorry, guys, I'm cutting you off. I see Hunter's typing. Hunter, you better finish fast, bud. Kat says, once again, one time I had a bad headache, and then suddenly my vision went black, and it felt horrible. I prayed in my head and started saying that Jesus Loves Me song, and then it stopped, and I could see again. It was actually such a terrifying event, I blacked out the memory for about 4 years. That's crazy. That's crazy. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's the one thing, like, you know, I was Christian at one time, and I guess like I do say that, you know, the lens that I sort of see things through is through the Abrahamic belief, and that language is the language I know the most, especially the Christian language. But even though I have become like more open to a less rigid sort of view, I can't deny the Jesus stuff when it comes to these particular kinds of phenomenon. Something about it, yeah, it's a unique aspect for sure. So I know I saw a couple super chats. I know it's a pain in the ass that I do these live, but that's kind of the fun of it, is the chaos. Okay, so Quincy McBurger King, lovely name. Thank you for the super chat, bud. Says, hello, you were one of the people on YouTube